Have you ever walked into a room full of people and still felt unseen? It's strange, isn't it? How you can be surrounded by noise, laughter, and conversation, yet deep inside, you feel like you don't belong there. You smile, you nod, you play along, but something in your chest feels heavy, like you're standing in the middle of a crowd, holding an invisible sign that says, "Please notice me." I know that feeling, and I used to think that being unwanted meant something was wrong with me. I'd overthink every silence, every unread message, every scene that never got a reply. It's like the world was telling me, "You're not enough." But here's what I've realized over time. It's not always rejection. Sometimes it's redirection. There are moments in life where it feels like God hides you. Not because you're unworthy, but because you're being prepared. You're being refined in silence. You're being taught how to see your own value before anyone else does. Because if you need others to tell you who you are, they'll also have the power to tell you who you're not. We live in a world that measures worth through attention. Followers, likes, replies, and validation. And the moment those disappear, we start to question our place. But what if that's exactly what's supposed to happen? What if the silence is where you finally hear your own voice? What if being unwanted is God's way of pulling you out of noise so you can finally understand what peace feels like when it's not tied to people's approval? I used to chase belonging like it was oxygen. I thought that if I could just prove my value, work harder, be kinder, be more useful, then maybe I'd finally be seen. But life kept teaching me that the more I begged for space in other people's stories, the more I lost my own. It's only when I stopped forcing connections that the right ones started forming naturally. If you're watching this and you've ever felt forgotten or left out, I want you to hear this clearly. There's nothing wrong with you. Feeling unwanted doesn't mean you're unloved. It might just mean that the chapter you're in is about rediscovering yourself, not being discovered by others. And I get it. It hurts when you give your best and it's not returned. When you show up for people who don't show up for you. When the love, the support, or the friendship feels one-sided. But the truth is, not everyone who walks away is your loss. Some are simply proof that you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed them. I'm not saying it's easy. There were nights I questioned everything, my purpose, my dreams, even my worth. But over time, I learned that loneliness can be one of the most sacred places. Because that's where you start hearing the quiet voice of God reminding you, you were never unwanted. You were just in training to stand alone. In this video, I want to share something that helped me turn that pain into clarity. It's not a list of steps, not some surface motivation, but 5 deep spiritual and practical insights that help me understand that feeling unwanted is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of awareness. Because the moment you understand that your worth isn't measured by who chooses you, but by who created you, everything changes. So stay with me. Because by the end of this video, I'll show you how to transform that feeling of being unwanted into one of the greatest awakenings of your life. Feeling unwanted doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It usually creeps in slowly, through small moments that you didn't even realize were shaping the way you see yourself. Maybe it started when you poured your heart into something and no one acknowledged it. Or maybe it was when you showed up for people again and again, only to realize that when you needed them, they were nowhere to be found. Those moments have a way of sinking deep into the heart. They whisper lies that sound like truth. You're not enough. You don't matter. You're replaceable. But over time, I began to see that these feelings weren't proof of rejection. They were indicators of misdirection. I was giving my worth to the wrong sources. I was expecting recognition from people who were never assigned to validate me. It's like standing under a broken faucet, waiting for water, when there's a well behind you waiting to be discovered. We live in a world that constantly says, you're only valuable if someone wants you. But that's not true. You were valuable before you were ever noticed. You were chosen before you were ever invited. Feeling unwanted doesn't reduce your value. It simply exposes where you've been placing it. You see, there's a reason God sometimes allows people to overlook you. He's protecting you from depending on attention that can be taken away. Because what's given by people can be taken by people, but what's placed by God stays forever. I remember a season where I felt like I was giving everything I had, in work, in friendships, even in love, and getting nothing back. I'd post something meaningful online, and it would get ignored. I'd help others build their dreams, but when it came to mine, I was alone. I started asking, God, why does it feel like I'm invisible? And that's when I learned something powerful. Sometimes God will hide you on purpose, not because you're unworthy, but because you're in preparation. A seed isn't buried to die, it's buried to grow. But if you judge yourself in the buried stage, you'll think you've been forgotten when you're actually being formed. That's why awareness is everything. Awareness shifts the feeling of being wanted into understanding. You begin to see that isolation can be an assignment, that hidden seasons are where roots go deep, that maybe God's silence isn't distance, it's development. Look around your life right now. There might be areas where you feel unseen, in your career, in your relationships, maybe even in your faith. But what if that space is not punishment? What if it's the exact environment you need to become who you're meant to be? When you feel unwanted, you're actually being freed from dependence. You're being pushed into independence, not the kind that isolates, but the kind that establishes. There's a verse that says, "The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." I used to read that and think it was just about Jesus, but it's also a picture of anyone who's ever felt overlooked. The stone wasn't rejected because it was worthless. It was rejected because it didn't fit where others were building. It was meant for something higher. That changed everything for me. I stopped chasing places where I had to beg to belong. I stopped shrinking to fit where I was never meant to stay. I started realizing that not being chosen by them might be the exact setup for being positioned by God. When you understand that, rejection no longer feels like loss. It feels like direction. You stop crying over closed doors because you start realizing those doors weren't meant to protect you. They were meant to redirect you. And I think that's where healing begins. When you stop needing people to choose you and start choosing yourself. When you stop begging for a seat at someone else's table and realize God's been preparing one just for you. When you stop defining your worth by who notices you and start defining it by who made you. You might be in that place right now, that silent, uncomfortable middle space where nothing seems to be moving. But I promise you, something is. Just because you can't see progress doesn't mean it's not happening. Roots grow before branches appear. This is where faith becomes real. When you keep showing up, even when no one claps. When you keep building, even when no one sees. When you keep serving, even when no one says thank you. Because you're no longer doing it to be seen, you're doing it because it's who you are. And that's the truth about feeling unwanted. It's an invitation to rediscover yourself. To remember that your value doesn't rise or fall based on who chooses to stay. You are not hard to love. They were just not equipped to understand your depth. You are not invisible. You're just not visible to those who aren't supposed to see you yet. So if you feel unwanted, don't rush to fill the silence. Sit with it. Learn from it. Let it teach you what kind of presence you want to be, not what kind of approval you want to chase. Because the most dangerous thing about feeling unwanted is not the pain, it's the temptation to prove your worth. Don't prove it. Protect it. Because the people who are meant for you won't need convincing. The opportunities that are yours won't need chasing. And the love that's aligned with you won't need to be begged for. It will simply recognize you. Maybe that's what this whole season is really about. God removing what distracts you, detaching what drains you, and developing who you truly are when there's no one left to validate you. Because once you find peace in being unseen, that's when you start becoming unstoppable. Rejection is one of the hardest things to face because it pierces straight through the ego and straight into the heart. But the truth is, rejection has always been God's tool for redirection. Every person who carried divine purpose had to first carry the pain of being unseen. You cannot hold a crown if you haven't first learned to stand without applause. You cannot lead people if you still need their approval. When I started studying scripture with this perspective, I noticed a pattern. Every person used mightily by God had a season of rejection that prepared them for recognition. Let's start with Joseph. His story is a perfect reflection of how divine purpose often hides behind betrayal. His own brothers, his flesh and blood, sold him into slavery because they couldn't handle his dream. Imagine the heartbreak of being hated for your potential, for something you didn't even fully understand yet. Yet, through every pit and every prison, Joseph's rejection became his preparation. The pit was the path to the palace. The betrayal was the bridge to his breakthrough. If Joseph had not been sold, he would have never reached Egypt. If he never reached Egypt, he would have never met Pharaoh. And if he never met Pharaoh, he would have never saved nations from famine, including the same brothers who rejected him. That's what rejection does. It refines your purpose. What hurts you today might be the very thing that positions you tomorrow. Then there's David. The man after God's own heart wasn't even invited to his own anointing ceremony. When Samuel came looking for the next king, Jesse presented every son except David. Think about that. His own father didn't consider him worthy enough to even stand in the lineup. Yet while everyone else was parading for attention, David was tending sheep in obscurity. And that's exactly where God found him. Rejection didn't disqualify David. It qualified him. Because when God anoints you, he doesn't check who approves of you. The same principle applies in life and business. Sometimes you'll watch others get chosen, promoted, or celebrated while you're still in the background doing quiet work. But that doesn't mean you're forgotten. It means you're in formation. The unseen seasons are where your character is shaped. It's where humility and strength grow roots. And when your time comes, no one can take what's been divinely assigned to you. And then, of course, there's Jesus, the most powerful story of rejection in history. The Son of God was rejected by the very people he came to save. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, loved the outcasts, and they crucified him. But his rejection was the greatest redirection of all time. It was the path to resurrection. The cross wasn't failure. It was fulfillment. So when you feel unwanted or cast aside, remember this. You're walking a road that every chosen person walked before you. Rejection is not evidence that God has abandoned you. It's proof that he's training you for something higher. Because before you can carry glory, you must carry humility. Before you can lead, you must first learn to serve. Before you can be trusted with influence, you must be tested with invisibility. That's the spiritual pattern. The kingdom doesn't promote through status, it promotes through surrender. God hides greatness in small places to see who can be faithful when no one's watching. That's why Jesus said, "The greatest among you will be your servant." To the world, that sounds backward. But to heaven, that's how power works. The path up always starts down. I once heard someone say, before God can put you in front of people, he needs to know he can trust you alone. That line hit me deeply because it reminded me of all the times I begged God to accelerate me, when in truth, he was still anchoring me. If he gave me visibility before I learned identity, I would have built everything on insecurity. Rejection is painful, yes, but it's also one of the most honest mirrors of your calling. The people who reject you are often the ones that help clarify who you're not meant to become. Joseph's brothers taught him leadership without approval. David's father taught him faithfulness without recognition. And Jesus taught us love without conditions. That's the spiritual truth behind rejection. It's not about punishment, it's about purification. It purifies your motives, your focus, and your loyalty. It strips away the need to be accepted so you can finally be authentic. Because when you no longer crave validation, you become unstoppable. You start moving with quiet confidence, guided by conviction, not by applause. If you're in that season right now, where people misunderstand you, where doors seem closed, where you feel like you've been overlooked, I want to tell you this: stay faithful. Don't fight for recognition. Fight for refinement. The same God who saw David in the field, Joseph in the pit, and Jesus on the cross sees you right now. You don't need everyone to understand you. You just need to understand that God's rejection is not rejection at all. It's selection. He's setting you apart. Because before he reveals you publicly, he perfects you privately. So don't despise the silence. Don't curse the closed doors. Don't resent the people who walked away. Every no you've heard is just making space for the right yes. Every person who doubted you is unknowingly writing the story that will one day inspire others. And when that day comes, when you finally see how every rejection was actually redirection, you'll thank God for every season that made you invisible. Because that's where you met Him the most. That's where you found your strength. That's where you discovered that being unseen wasn't the end. It was the beginning of becoming unshakable. Every crown has a story of rejection behind it. Every purpose has a price. And if you're carrying the weight of being unseen right now, know this: you're closer to your calling than you think. There's a moment every person reaches after a long battle with rejection. The moment where you stop fighting to be seen and start realizing you were never meant to be validated by everyone in the first place. That's the shift. That's where pain turns into power. When you stop trying to prove your worth and start walking in it, something changes inside you. You stop performing and start embodying. You stop chasing acceptance and start radiating assurance, because power doesn't come from being wanted, it comes from being aware. Awareness is the turning point. It's the moment when you wake up and realize that your worth was never missing. It was just misplaced. That every time you tried to convince someone to value you, you were actually teaching them how little you valued yourself. You were negotiating with rejection when you were meant to outgrow it. The question isn't, why didn't they choose me? The real question is, why do I keep needing them to? Why do I keep placing my peace in hands that have already shown they can't hold it? Why do I keep replaying the moments they left instead of focusing on the ones who stayed? Once I began asking those questions, I noticed something strange. Rejection didn't sting the same anymore. It still happened, but it didn't define me. I started seeing it like a signal, not a sentence. Like a divine no that was saving me from smaller things so I could step into bigger ones. That's the same in business, in calling, even in relationships. Most people collapse not because they failed, but because they took failure personally. They made rejection a reflection of identity instead of direction. But when you realize rejection is just redirection, you stop wasting energy on bitterness and start investing it into awareness. Think about it. The same energy you use to replay what they said, what they did, what they didn't do, could be the same energy you use to rebuild yourself. You could be learning, refining, creating, or serving. Because while rejection feels like it's taking something from you, awareness gives it all back. In business, I've seen this principle over and over. When people reject your offer, your pitch, or even your presence, it's not the end. It's feedback. It's clarity. It's God's way of pruning your focus. When customers don't buy, it's a lesson about alignment. When a partnership fails, it's a reminder that vision must come before validation. The truth is, rejection gives you two options: to shrink or to sharpen. To either see yourself as unworthy or to see yourself as unfinished. And when you choose the second one, life opens up. You start refining your skill instead of complaining about your situation. You start building instead of begging. In solitude, something sacred happens. When the noise dies down, awareness grows louder. You begin hearing your real voice again. Not the echo of opinions, not the noise of judgment, not the buzz of comparison. Just you. That's the birthplace of clarity. That's where power begins. Because clarity and strength are not found in crowds. They're built in quiet places. That's where David learned to fight lions before he ever faced Goliath. That's where Joseph learned leadership in prison before he ever entered the palace. That's where Jesus prayed alone before he ever walked on water. Every great story of purpose was written in the ink of solitude. If you want to turn pain into power, stop running from the silence. Sit with it, let it speak. Let it show you what still hurts, what still triggers you, what still holds you captive. Then, let awareness do what healing cannot. It rewrites the story. Because awareness doesn't erase the pain, it transforms it. It turns "they left me" into "maybe they were never meant to stay." It turns "they rejected me" into "they redirected me." It turns "I failed" into "I learned." You start walking differently when you reach this level of awareness. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop overextending yourself to people who only take. You stop auditioning for places you've already outgrown. You start living from conviction, not confusion. And here's the paradox. When you finally stop needing to be wanted, you become magnetic. Not because you're trying to be seen, but because peace has a frequency. Confidence has a vibration, and people feel it. You attract not because you're desperate, but because you're aligned. That's the real power behind rejection awareness. It strips away illusion. You stop mistaking attention for affection, praise for partnership, and followers for friends. You learn to discern. You start asking, does this align with my calling? Instead of, does this make me feel wanted? And that's when your life begins to compound. Business, purpose, relationships, all of it. Because you're no longer moving from reaction, but from revelation. You're no longer trying to prove something to the world. You're living from what you already know to be true. When I started to live this way, everything changed. The opportunities that left suddenly made sense. The people who walked away no longer felt like a loss. And the ones who stayed, they stayed because they were meant to. I stopped chasing validation and started chasing vision. In the process, I learned this. Awareness is wealth. The richest people aren't those with the most money. They're the ones who've mastered their awareness. They know what deserves their energy and what doesn't. They know that rejection is not a sign of failure. It's a filter. It separates what's meant for you from what's not. So if you're walking through a season of being overlooked, I want you to shift the question. Don't ask, why didn't they choose me? Ask, why do I keep choosing environments that can't see me? That's how you reclaim your power. That's how you stop being a victim of rejection and start becoming the author of your redirection. The awareness you develop here will serve you everywhere. In business, in relationships, in purpose. Because once you've faced rejection and learned from it, there's not much left that can break you. You become grounded, wise, and calm. You start leading from stillness instead of stress. And that's when you realize the very pain that made you question your worth was actually building the foundation for your power. It was never about being wanted. It was about becoming aware. Because once you're aware, no one can take that from you. Feeling unwanted doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means you're being repositioned. What if what you're feeling right now isn't punishment, but placement? What if God isn't rejecting you, but simply rearranging the pieces of your life so that they finally align with your true calling? Sometimes He has to pull you away from where you feel most comfortable to bring you to where you're meant to grow. You see, we often pray for breakthrough, but forget that breakthrough rarely comes through comfort. It comes through stretching, pruning, and yes, sometimes through rejection. Because you can't carry everything into your next season. You can't bring the wrong people, wrong habits, or wrong mindsets into the life you've been asking for. So when things start to fall away, it's not a loss, it's alignment. The moment you stop chasing belonging, you'll start attracting alignment. That's the turning point. When you stop forcing yourself to fit into rooms that no longer reflect your purpose, new doors open that do. You begin to attract people who understand your value instead of trying to convince those who never will. You begin to walk with peace instead of pressure. And it's not instant. Alignment happens gradually. It's like when you finally decide to clean a cluttered space. You start removing what doesn't belong, and suddenly, everything that's meant to stay has room to breathe. That's what happens in your soul when you stop clinging to where you're not wanted. In business, in calling, even in relationships, this principle applies. The people and opportunities that truly align with your purpose will find you when you stop chasing what only feeds your insecurity. The right partnerships will come when you're no longer desperate for validation. The right customers will appear when your service is rooted in authenticity, not approval. The right relationships will flourish when your identity isn't tied to who accepts you. I learned this the hard way. For years, I tried to prove I was worthy, through work, through performance, through making people see my value. But that only drained me. It was when I finally said, I don't need to be chosen to be called, that peace entered my life. That's when business started flowing, not because I was working harder, but because I was finally aligned. Alignment brings ease where effort once brought exhaustion. It doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means your energy is finally directed toward what's meant for you. That's the difference between striving and surrendering. Striving says, I have to make this happen. Surrendering says, if it's meant for me, I'll be ready when it arrives. And I want to tell you this, especially if you're watching this right now in a season where you feel invisible or unappreciated, you are not behind, you are not forgotten. You are not less valuable because someone couldn't see your worth. You are exactly where you need to be for your awareness to expand. Every setback, every closed door, every silent moment, it's all shaping you for alignment. So stop forcing what's fading. Let go of what's leaving. And trust that what's meant for you is not fragile. You don't have to beg to belong in a place that was never built for you. You don't have to lower your standards to be accepted by people who can't meet you where you're going. Because when you finally learn to find peace in your own worth, no one's absence can shake you again. You'll walk differently, talk differently, think differently. You'll start to see rejection not as something to escape from, but as something to learn from. You'll realize that every time something didn't work out, it was actually working in your favor. And here's where I want to leave you with a thought that will lead to our next conversation. Rejection loses its power when confidence takes its place. But how do you rebuild that confidence after being hurt, unseen, or abandoned? In the next video, I'll show you how to rebuild confidence after rejection. Because once you find peace in your worth, once you remember who you are, no one's silence, absence, or opinion can ever shake you again. So if this season feels heavy, don't fight it. Feel it, learn from it, and let it redirect you. Because the truth is, you were never unwanted. You were simply being prepared for what truly belongs to you.